And now, our feature program.
At times when we couldn't get in, I carried my Emerson portable. Why it was called portable, I'll never know. It weighed 40 pounds. And I'd stand outside behind the screen near the Freddie Fitzsimmons bowling alley and listen to the game. And when Snider came up, you always get ready because you knew Snider could hit it over right field screen. That was a big thrill to see a ball come up.
Being able to go to Bedford Avenue, I guess it was, where Duke Snider used to hit the home runs, and watch the balls come over. We got 3 or 4 balls over there because they listen. Duke Snider's hitting us, going, boom, gone. I was one of those kids in that street, catching those balls.
Of course, I always thought they spelled it wrong in Brooklyn. Should have been D-O-O-K, the Duke. He was royalty in Brooklyn. And I think that was part of it. You take any youngster and vault him quickly into a place of such prominence and give him a title that suggests royalty. That's a lot to live up to.
Well, in those years, too, the center fielders all seemed to have a special elan to them, and the Duke was one of those center fielders.
He was more flamboyant, boisterous a little bit more. I mean, he would say things, whatever came to his mind, bam, he's like me. It blurted out.
And he wasn't a perfect human being, and he could growl at the fans, but they loved him anyway, because he was the Duke.
If he had a bad day, he didn't like that, and he couldn't take it. So he kind of wimped a little bit. And a lot of times we come in the dugout or something like that, and we said, "Okay, Duke, now who stole your candy today?"
This is Bedford Avenue, where the famous Ebbsfield scoreboard used to rise. My friend Herbie Friedman lived in an apartment across the street that overlooked that scoreboard. When the Dodgers were in town, Herbie was the most popular kid in Brooklyn. The kids that couldn't make it up to Herbie's gathered here on Bedford, around a portable radio, hoping for a Duke Snider home run. When one came, they thundered across the street to claim their prize. The Duke was ideal for the new television age. A big, good-looking California kid with $1 million swing. But his struggles with the press and his struggles with the fans became as legendary as his home runs. His biggest struggle, however, may have been with himself. Former semi-pro baseball player Ward Snider migrated from Ohio to California with his wife Florence in hope of finding work. Ward and Florence's only child was born September 19, 1926. In 1931, 5-year-old Edwin Donald Snider was coming home from kindergarten. His father announced, "Here comes His Majesty, the Duke."
My dad worked at Goodyear Tire Company in Los Angeles, and he'd come home. He worked in the pits, they called it, and that was the hot equipment. He'd have blisters all over his hands, and there was quite a few days that he'd take me out, hit fly balls to me. When I was a little kid, I always put the bat on my left shoulder, and he said, "You swing from that side because first base is several steps closer from that side, and most of the ballparks have shorter right field fences than they have left field fences." Every once in a while I ask him, I say, "Well, Dad, I do everything else right-handed. Do you think there's a chance maybe I could bat right-handed too?" And he says, "Well, when you perfect batting left-handed, then we'll talk about right-handed." Well, I never perfected it. And my mother was a great great lady. She just My dad and I get in arguments every once in a while, and she, you two little kids try and get along out there now, things like that. She was sort of the peacemaker of the family.
And that presents the World Series. Good afternoon, baseball fans everywhere.
Not unlike most kids of that era, Duke's other pastime was the radio. He listened religiously to the Dodgers radio broadcast with Red Barber on station KHJ in Compton.
My ambition was to be a Dodger, mainly because of the 1941 World Series. I listened to on the radio when I was in school, and they had a couple of young players on their team by the name of Pete Reiser and Pee Wee Reese, who were very, very, the names, not just the names, but the way they played baseball was very exciting for me.
But two relatively unknown athletes would have the most profound impact on the young Snider: a career minor league player and a junior college standout from Pasadena.
Arnold Jigger Statz played center field for the Los Angeles Angels in the Pacific Coast League. And my mom and dad used to take me to Wrigley Field in Los Angeles to watch the Angels play. And Statz was a center fielder, a leadoff man, right-handed batter. And boy, he could catch the ball, and I just loved to watch him play center field. I saw Jackie play football and basketball, and he broad jump and track and baseball at Pasadena Junior College in California. And I used to just marvel at the way he could perform in all the different sports.
In 1943, young Duke Snider caught the eye of Long Beach Telegram Cub reporter Pete Rozelle.
The most amazing game I've seen, including NFL games for 30 years I was commissioner, was when we were playing Long Beach Poly, and with 40 seconds left, Duke went back to pass and he threw a ball 64 yards in the air. He played at a rival junior high school, and when he came over to pitch, we'd strengthen the backboards. We pitched softball, and I know that I got the 3 cheerleaders for Linwood Junior High School out to try and distract Duke. And apparently he was distracted because he ended up marrying one of them, Beverly Minow, later on.
And he was probably the handsomest young man that anybody had ever seen. He was probably the most gifted young man that anybody had ever seen in that vicinity. He could run like a deer. He could swing the bat harder than anybody that you ever saw. He was the most graceful guy. Duke looked better striking out than the rest of us did hitting a triple.
By 1943, Pete Reiser's bouts with center field walls around the league had become more prevalent and severe. Brooklyn needed a center fielder and a left-handed home run hitter. Several teams, including the Dodgers, were already hot on Snider's trail. The Pirates dropped out when their scouts saw Snider laughing after striking out. He thought the kid from Compton didn't take the game seriously enough. However, Branch Rickey's Bird Dog scout, Tom Downey, wrote back to his boss in Brooklyn, "Snider has steel springs in his legs and dynamite in his bat." The Dodger scout appeared on the Snider doorstep with typewriter in tow.
I said, "What's a typewriter for?" He said, "Well, we're going to sign you today." And my mother and I were the only ones home because my dad was in the service. And I was a little uneasy about the signing, but no one had mentioned any money. And finally he said, "We're going to give you $750 bonus and $250 a month." My mother signed for me, and if I'd had $750 and the $250 a month, I would have given it to them to play at that particular time. That's how much I wanted to play.
The following spring, a 17-year-old minor leaguer arrived at Bear Mountain, New York.
But I knew right when I got there that I wasn't expected to stay too long because they gave me a pair of pants. I had a 32 waist at the time, and they gave me a 38 pair of pants, and I had to double them over and fold them over. And finally, one of the older players, I think it was Paul Wayner, told the clubhouse man, he says, "Give this guy a pair of pants that fit him." And he says, "We don't have any Little League pants in here."
Snider's talents were anything but Little League. He displayed a swing as natural as that of Musial and Williams.
A New York writer wrote that Duke Snider has the potential to become the greatest baseball player in the history of the sport. Well, that's not only pretty heady stuff when you're just approaching your 20s, just entering your 20s, but that's a heavy burden to carry.
When I first came up, there was the hype that I was going to be the left-handed power hitter on the ball club, and once you start, probably the worst thing that can happen to you in professional sports is to get the computer working a little bit too much from the shoulders up.
Duke was now being compared to his idol, Pete Reiser, but Snider had grown bored with Ricky's emphasis on stamina and repetition. The Dodger brass threatened to send him packing. Snider's reputation as a problem child was launched, a reputation that would dog him for the next 50 years. Over the winter, Duke returned home to California and bought his first car, a '33 Chevy, for $200. Evenings were spent listening to the other Duke on the radio, cruising Compton with friends, and parking near the beach with his best girl, Beverly.
We'd go to the Pike, and we'd spend $1, and we'd go down and we'd play the penny arcade, and we'd go to a movie, and that was our Saturday night outing.
Duke's movie of choice was Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story.
I still cry when Lou Gehrig gives his final talk on the day they gave him at Yankee Stadium.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
While thousands of kids faced danger overseas, Duke faced life in the bushes with the Dodgers' Class B team in Virginia, where he would play center field.
And I always sat in back of our bus driver, who was also our trainer. He was also our groundskeeper, and his wife ran the concession stand. I mean, it was a family affair on that ball club, but he stuttered, and his nickname was Curly. Got to talk to him while we were on these trips to keep him awake. And we got to that fork one night coming back. It was probably about 3 or 4 in the morning. And he's going straight towards a house was in the middle of this fork. He's going straight towards that house, and I hollered at him, "Curly, you all right?" Yeah, I see it. And he wheeled that thing to the left and got it back on the road.
By 1944, while Hitler's rockets rained destruction on British cities, the Dukes starred in the Piedmont League. The Newport News team consisted mostly of 16 and 17-year-old kids, as well as players that the Army had tagged as 4F. On September 19th, on his 18th birthday, Snider received a telegram telling him to report to L.A. for his Navy physical. Florence Snider soon would have a husband and a son off to war.
Another friend of mine who's from the Southern California area and I were in charge of the mess hall, and what that means is that we did the dishes. We ran them through the dishwasher and stacked them and got everything ready for the next meal. And if the dishwasher didn't get some of the food off the plates, well, I'd work on my throwing arm a little bit, and I'd throw them out the window. And pretty soon we got to where we could get it out that porthole without even looking. Well, a couple of my buddies would go down and say, "You think any of you guys could throw the ball length of a submarine?" And no, nobody can throw a ball that far. A submarine was 330 feet or something like that. But these guys couldn't. They'd try. They'd start trying, see how far they could throw it. They throw it maybe 2/3 of the length of the sub. And I said, "Well, we got a guy on our ship that throws the ball pretty far. We're thinking maybe it'd be interesting if we got a little wager going. Maybe he'd come down and see if he could throw one the length of the sub." Well, I made a nice little living out of that for a while.
In 1946, after the Dodgers lost the pennant to St. Louis, columnist Tommy Holmes speculated the Dodgers would be National League champs if they had one left-handed pull hitter who could take advantage of that inviting right field wall. The next season, at age 20, Duke Snider found himself face-to-face with idols, Pee Wee Reese, Pete Reiser, and Dixie Walker.
Well, I saw pictures of Ebbets Field, and I couldn't believe that a baseball park would be built like that, because It was a hitter's ballpark. I got a glimpse of that right field fence. I says, my goodness, I said, this might be some fun.
Pete Reeser will be out on the field pulling him down, along with Dixie Walker, busy now divulging the secret of his success. Yes, sir, them bums is big news.
Dixie was a right fielder, and at that time I was a right fielder. And I'm out in right field with him, and he's chasing the balls hit off the bat during batting practice, and I'm chasing some. And I asked him, I said, if a ball hits up there, what can you expect? And he said, find out for yourself, kid. And just to let you know a little bit of this dog eat dog, he's not going to give you too much information to take his position away from him.
John Griffin, the Dodgers clubhouse manager, asked Duke before the season, before his rookie year, what number he wanted. He said he had number 4 was available, and Duke liked that number because of his fondness for Lou Gehrig, and so he took it. And Griffin told him at the time not to disgrace the number or embarrass it, because Dolph Camilli used to wear that number. But Dolph Camilli was still a big hero in Brooklyn, and so Duke was putting a little bit more pressure on himself because he wanted the number of his favorite player, Lou Gehrig.
The 1947 Dodgers opened the season with a series of exhibition games in New York. The first time Duke Snider saw a big league ball game in person, he was one of the center fielders. Standing in the middle of Yankee Stadium wearing Lou Gehrig's number on his back, he had his first brush with immortality.
I hustled out. The sun was getting quite bad in center field at that particular time. And I said, Joe, is it all right if I use your sunglasses? We don't have any. We didn't bring ours today. Sure, go ahead. Well, here I am standing in center field with Joe DiMaggio's sunglasses on, and I am so thrilled that I don't even know if there's a game going on. I'm looking at these sunglasses sticking out up above my forehead, and just think, boy, I got Joe DiMaggio's sunglasses on. I'm coming a long way.
Snider's first official at-bat and base hit as a big leaguer came in 1947 during the season opener at Ebbets Field against the Boston Braves. But a less immediately successful rookie captured all the headlines that day.
We're ahead 7-2 or 7-3, and our manager, Bert Schotten, says, get a bat and hit for Dixie Walker. So I pinched hit for Dixie Walker and got a base hit to right field. And again, I thought, hey, this Major League Baseball might not be that tough. I wrote a letter home to my mom. I cut out the box score, and I went 1 for 1. And I said, Mom, the whole story's about Jackie Robinson, but I'm out hitting him. I'm 1 for 1.
But big league pitching wasn't so easy. Snider was impatient at the plate, and his high strikeout totals would send him back to the minor leagues. Meanwhile, Jackie Robinson had found his mark. Duke was shipped off to St. Paul the same day Robinson's consecutive game hitting streak was halted at 21. While Robinson guided his team to its first World Series since the war, Duke was back at his parents' home in Compton, listening to the World Series history unfold.
Back. He makes a one-handed catch against the bullpen. Oh, doctor.
At the end of 1947, Pete Reeser was given last rites after slamming into one too many walls. He survived, but his career was finished. The following spring, Duke became Ricky's pet project. He assigned Duke to club hitting instructor George Sisler. Duke opened the season in Montreal. Ricky told his young center fielder, "Make me bring you back."
The job was more or less mine in 1948 if I could handle it, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready mentally to handle the center field job for the Dodgers. Ricky came to Montreal. We were playing a game that night, and I hit a home run, drove in some runs, and after the game was over, he came into the clubhouse, and I said, "Mr. Ricky," I said, "don't you think 77 RBIs in 77 games and 23 home runs is enough numbers for you to bring me back?" He says, "You pack your bag, young man." He says, "You're the center fielder for the Brooklyn Dodgers tomorrow night."
Pete's problem was he was so determined to catch a fly ball that he very often didn't know where the wall was, and he literally limited his career and wrecked his career running into walls. I think it was Branch Rickey whose idea was to pad the outfield walls, finally to protect their own outfielders from running into walls. And after that went in and Duke became Pete's successor in center field, he would literally climb those walls with his spikes like Batman.
That year, Branch Rickey was calling Snider and first baseman Gil Hodges the power combination of the future.
Well, you know, I think the worst thing that you can do as a hitter is to go up to the plate with a fear of striking out. And I struck out quite a bit and didn't like it. I got 2 strikes on me. And I fouled one back and back of home plate, and the wind's blowing out a little bit. And I stood there and I said, don't go in the stands. I wanted the catcher to catch the ball so I wouldn't strike out. Now that is really sick mentally.
Despite his phobias, Duke became the first Dodger to hit a home run in each National League park in 1949. Snider drove home the winning run to clinch the pennant. Thousands of well-wishers greeted the Dodgers at Penn Station after the game. 75 extra police officers arrived to control the crowd. But as the 1949 series drew closer, Snider was turning himself into a basket case.
It's something that I've wanted to do since I was that high. And I wanted to play in Yankee Stadium. I wanted to beat the Yankees in a World Series, and here I am. And I'd try to swallow, and it'd be like having a cotton ball in your mouth.
And he hadn't even left the hotel.
I know this was deliberate. This had to be deliberate. We went to Yankee Stadium in 1949, and they just rehabbed the clubhouses. When we went into the visitors' clubhouse, it was the old Yankee clubhouse. Those dirty birds left Gehrig's and Ruth's lockers still in there. They hadn't moved them yet. We're in our early 20s. We walk in there to play the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, and we stopped cold in our tracks.
They announced the starting lineup, and I was just hitting third, standing there next to people. My knees are shaking, and I'm almost banging against each other. I'm so nervous. 60-some thousand people in Yankee Stadium. Here I am, a boyhood dream.
The packed house at Yankee Stadium watched Don Newcomb and Yankee fireballer Allie Reynolds battle to a 0-0 deadlock through 8 innings. Tommy Henrich's 9th inning home run spoiled Brooklyn's bid for an opening game win.
Well, the harder Allie Reynolds threw the ball, the harder I swung. And as a result, I struck out 3 times in my first World Series game. I mean, that was disaster. I tied a World Series record in a 5-game series. We got beat 4-1. Struck out 8 times in 5 games.
The Brooklyn outfit was tough. They played right down to the wire.
Off camera, Joe DiMaggio commented, "They ought to tell that kid not to swing so hard." But it was another Yankee who gave Duke his most enduring piece of advice.
The 2 games at Yankee Stadium, I didn't get on base. And we went back to Ebbets Field for the 3rd game of the 49 World Series. And I finally got a walk, and I got down to first base, and Tommy Henrich came over to hold me on. And I said, "Gee, Tom, I thought I was never going to get here." And he says, "Well, you can be sure I wasn't going to go down up to home plate and pick you up and carry you down here. You got to earn your way down here." And that helped. That really helped me.
Duke returned to Compton, where he received a hero's welcome, but he had trouble imagining himself in the role.
People in my hometown gave me a night for being in the World Series and everything, and I apologized to them all for having such a bad World Series, and I said, if I ever get another chance, I'm going to certainly try to do a lot better job.
During the off-season, Duke took a part-time job as a postal worker. His $4,200 World Series check came in handy, but it was small compensation for what had been lost.
It was a part of maturity, a part of growing up mentally, and I think adverse things happen to you sometimes make you a much better person or a much better player.
Over the winter, 23-year-old Duke Snider gained 10 pounds. Tommy Holmes of the Brooklyn Eagle commented, "Those pounds look good, like the patches of gray starting around his temples." That spring, Snider's determination showed up in his hands. Extra hours of batting practice left them bloody and calloused.
One of the early years, Mr. Rickey brought a electric eye arrangement down in spring training and set it up for the strike zone and had Duke stay in there hour on end, calling whether these pitches were in or out of the strike zone. Try to teach him to lay off this high pitch. Well, Duke was a good student, and he eventually learned that.
In 1950, when manager Bert Schotten asked him to sacrifice bunt during a close game, Snider threw a tirade. Schotten gave him the option of apologizing or taking a fine. Duke took the fine. In 1950, Snider, Robinson, and Reese were responsible for 40% of the team's run total. Snider's base hit almost forced a playoff against the Phillies, but Cal Abrams was thrown out at home. That year, Walter O'Malley said he was offered $600,000 plus 5 players for Snider and Hodges. O'Malley refused. In 1951, Brooklyn manager Bert Schotten, a stately, grandfatherly figure, was replaced by a drinker of grasshoppers and a lover of poodles. Charlie Dressen was a crude, cagey ex-Marine who for years lived in the shadow of the more dynamic Leo DeRocher.
Charlie would get on Duke in front of everybody, and Duke would go out the next day, hit 2 home runs, drive in 5 runs, and then the hell with you, Charlie. And Charlie would take his little dog from John Griffin, who was our clubhouse guy, and that's all Charlie wanted, was to shake Duke up because he knew how great Duke Snider was.
Charlie had a way of wanting to get somebody mad, or just to wake them up, sort of. And every once in a while I needed to be woken up. It worked, yeah. He'd get me mad, and I'd go out and take it out on the opposing ball club.
In June 1951, Brooklyn, with its mighty outfield of Pafko, Ferrillo, and Snider, won 17 of 20 games. That year, the trio collected 250 RBIs. But the pull of fate would prove even mightier than the Brooklyn outfield.
As a man on the street, what do you think of the National League race?
Well, I'll tell you, I think the clubs in the National League are pretty well evenly matched this year, and it's anybody's race. Naturally, I like the New York Giants.
Oh, you like the Giants, I see. And your name, please?
Well, Leo DeRocher.
But there was a door, was always locked, of course, between the 2 clubhouses in Ebbets Field. And this one particular day, the Giants were going kind of bad. It was earlier in the season. And some of our players were hollering at Leo, who was managing the ball club, and the Giants are dead and this and that. They were hollering a lot of things through the door. And they could hear, they heard all that. And we were laughing. We were sitting in our lockers and joking around and laughing at what was going on. But it came back to haunt us.
The last couple of months of the 1951 season, both the Dodgers' leadoff man, Pee Wee Reese, and their number 3 hitter, Duke Snider, fell into dreary slumps. While the Dodgers struggled to play .500 ball, the Giants were amazing. They won 37 of their last 44 games. 1951 came down to a single playoff game. Then Bobby Thompson hit the shot heard round the world.
And when the ball disappeared, I saw dollar signs just flying away because we didn't make $1 million then. And the $5,000 or $6,000 for getting the World Series was very important to us. Branca shouldn't get the blame for this thing because I had a miserable September. Left a lot of runners on base. And if I hadn't done that, there wouldn't have been a playoff.
The Sniders prepared for the long trip back to California. Once again, Duke would spend an agonizing winter facing the man in the mirror.
In 1951, after the playoff with the Giants, we really had to stick together. That was a sad time for us, but we realized that we were a team, and if whatever happened, if it was good, we had it together, and if it were not good, then we had to stick together and care about one another just like we always had. So I do think that the Dodger relationship was special.
We had a great bunch of wives, and so they all lived out there and got together, and it was family. They were friends. I mean, they communicated during the winter, and during the summer, as you say, the guys went on the road, the wives get lonely.
It took a while to get to know people in the community, and most of the people that we got to know, I guess, were fans at the ballpark. And so we stuck with each other and helped each other, and it made a special bond for us.
I think they're the greatest years of our life. We were very fortunate to play, to live there, to be a part of it. The wives were close. It was a delight. It was, I guess from what I hear, it's so different from it is now. We didn't realize the uniqueness of our situation at that time.
I think I had more fun with Pee Wee on the field, and we used to drive to the ballpark together every other day. I'd drive one day, he'd drive the next day.
Duke and Pee Wee were two different personalities. So this night we're driving up, and Pee Wee happens to be driving. He picked us up, and we take off, go across into Manhattan through the Battery Tunnel, up on the West Side highway to go along all the way up to the Bronx. But we got pulled over by a state police, or a policeman, city policeman.
And I can remember this just like it happened yesterday. And that Snider sat in the back seat, and the cop comes over and says, "Do you realize that you were going pretty fast?" And Duke says, "Officer, he was going much too fast," and I told him that, So, I tried to get him to stop. And the officer kind of looked back there at him, looked at me, and he said,
"Where do you work?" Pee Wee said, "Well, I work for the Dodgers." And the guy says, "Reese, Harold Reese. Harold Pee Wee Reese. You're Pee Wee." He said, "Take it easy. Good luck tonight." So Pee Wee very smugly drives on, no ticket.
When I pulled away, I said, "Duke, do you think that was funny?" And the man was being very nice, and you could have had to give a reason for him to give me a ticket. And he probably should have given you one too. And so help me, if I'm lying, I'm dying. The next night, it was Duke's turn to drive, and practically at the same place. And he was going, on that cocky way of his, and here comes a cop.
As he's walking back, Pee Wee says to Duke, "Okay, Duke, let's see you do your stuff."
And Duke gets out, and he says, he's kind of proud. He says, "Where you going, son?" He says, "I'm going to the polio grounds, to play the Giants." And he says, "I'm a baseball player, playing with Brooklyn."
This cop takes those licenses from Duke. He looks down his nose at Duke, and he says, "I don't like baseball." Duke says, "I don't like tickets, and I don't like cops. Give it to me, let's go." That was it. He got one. It was silence all the way to the Polo Grounds after that.
I always felt that I had to go out there and drive in some runs and get a couple of hits and help the team win. And when I didn't do that, I was very critical of myself and took it out on myself. Some will say that I pouted. Some will say that I was a very moody type player. And they're right in that respect.
In 1952, Duke Snider led the franchise in hits and RBIs. But after he loafed on a fly ball, Dressen benched him. Snider came back with a vengeance. In his first World Series since the 1949 disaster, he redeemed himself. His 4 home runs tied a series record held by Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. Although the Dodgers lost the series, Snider became the toast of Madison Avenue. He promoted everything from baby mattresses to cigarettes. But Duke was as difficult on the set as he was on the field.
Duke, what do you do to keep yourself in top condition?
Well, Captain Midnight, I get plenty of sleep, exercise, and the right kind of foods. And I drink chocolate-flavored Ovaltine. Remember, I said Ovaltine. Not one of those imitation milk flavorings, or the other kind with just a few vitamins.
Well, I never did care for the taste of Ovaltine. And I says, why don't you go out and get some chocolate milk and put in that glass? And let me drink the chocolate milk, because I really don't like the taste of Ovaltine.
And Ovaltine tastes good, too.
Right again, Duke.
Snider was now one of the 3 best center fielders in baseball, but many believed he was 3rd best in New York. The debate over Willie, Mickey, and the Duke became fuel for late-night arguments in taverns and on street corners around New York for the next decade.
And one night in a New York bar, the argument got so ferocious that 2 fans were arguing whether Mays was better than Snider, 2 National League fans. And they got into a fistfight, I mean a real brawl right there in the bar. The bar manager had to call the cops. When the cops got there, they found out that these 2 guys who were slugging each other over this argument were father and son.
Duke Snider for the Dodgers, Mickey Mantle or Joe DiMaggio for the Yankees, and Willie Mays for the Giants. You can't name better center fielders. And that was some of the beauty of the feelings we had for the ball clubs and the controversies we had with our friends in the neighborhood, because who's the better center fielder?
They always say who was the best, Willie, Mickey, or the Duke during that era. And to me, well, of course you got to say Willie. I mean, to pick out the best one, you got to go to the bottom line, you know, and that's when it's all over. You get your bubblegum cards and you look at him, and Willie got 600 home runs. He played 24 years, almost. I don't know how many years he played. But Duke, to me, was as good as anybody I ever saw play.
Well, first of all, they felt Duke was a great ball player. But I was young, Mickey was young, and Duke had been there before we got there. But he never got the I suggest due as far as the center fielder was concerned.
He didn't like the amount of weight that they gave to that in Brooklyn. Walter O'Malley, who I respected as an owner and a businessman, and I thought he didn't always have a good feel for the player's side. And so he put up on our scoreboard one time in Ebbets Field a comparative Mays, Mantle, and Snider. He thought that was a great fan attraction and interest, and in a way it was. It didn't sell very well to the players, and particularly Duke. Duke thought that was totally inappropriate to keep him up comparing daily with the other 2 great center fielders. And so those are the kind of things that caused Duke to have this irritation about some things.
In 1953, the year Red Barber was fired and replaced by 25-year-old Vin Scully, Duke enjoyed a 26-game hitting streak and the first of 5 consecutive seasons with 40 or more home runs. Many consider the 1953 Dodgers the greatest in the team's history. The Boys of Summer clinched the pennant easily, winning 105 games.
This lineup was incredible. That was the year I think they hit 221 home runs and set the major league record. And I remember vividly being at batting practice and watching ball after ball being hit out of the ballpark. Carl Fiorillo was the number 8 hitter, and I think he won the batting title the next year as the number 8 hitter.
While the Dodgers and Yankees ruled the sports headlines, William Levitt and his builders churned out a home every 15 minutes. Another building revolution was taking place on the other coast. Los Angeles became the fastest-growing American city of the decade. Much of LA's growth would be spearheaded by a 22-year-old city councilwoman, Roz Wyman.
We didn't have the music center at this point. We weren't advanced in culture, and we weren't really advanced in sports. My goal, I think maybe to make my mother happy, was to bring Major League Baseball to Los Angeles. She was a wild Cub fan.
Just north of downtown Los Angeles, 360 acres of barren land had been targeted by the California Housing Authority for development under the Housing Act. The ravine lay at the convergence of several major freeways and was identified as the possible site of 3,000 housing units for indigent families. The LA Times attacked the plan as creeping socialism.
Senator, what is the purpose of this investigation into the UN employees?
We're checking all evidence of communism on the part of American nationals, either working for American the American delegation or foreign delegations.
As McCarthyism gained steam, 3 highly placed members of the California Housing Authority were accused of communist activity. All 3 pleaded the Fifth and were promptly fired. By 1953, through the efforts of a young senator named Nixon, the city of Los Angeles reclaimed Chavez Ravine from the state. The new mayor, Norris Paulson, a devout Dodger fan, was starting to dream big.
We saw the teams beginning to move. I never dreamed that we would really get the Dodgers. That was one of those things. You send those messages up to above and say, please answer my prayers.
Giants owner Horace Stoneham wanted out of Harlem. Stoneham cited poor parking and a deteriorating neighborhood. O'Malley, suffering similar problems, was willing to stay in Brooklyn if the city would give him land for a new domed stadium at Atlantic and Flatbush Avenues. Now city construction coordinator Robert Moses was faced with the possibility of losing the Giants and the Dodgers. By 1955, the Brooklyn fans in O'Malley were getting impatient. If a World Series flag were ever to fly over Brooklyn, it would have to happen now.
This was becoming a team of old men. Jackie was on his last legs. Don Newcomb was getting old. Roy Campanella was reaching the end of his career. Carl Furillo, his peak had passed. And Pee Wee wasn't a spring chicken either.
I had a little song that I'd sing around the batting cage every once in a while. Old Father Time is catching up with that old gang of mine. And Jackie and Pee Wee and Furillo, they'd give me a dirty look when I just started singing that.
Joe, we've had some real good weather down here, and all these pitchers have been running real good, I know. How are the arms coming along?
Alston experimented with all manner of different lineups. Now, the reason that Alston went through that exercise in spring training was to shake up the complacency of a team that had been together since 1947. By making all the players think that none of their jobs was safe, he stoked their creative fires.
By August, Brooklyn raced toward the pennant, and Duke was ahead of Babe Ruth's record home run pace. But Duke Snider's bid came to a halt when Johnny Clipstein of the Cubs bounced a curve off Snider's kneecap. Duke would hit only 4 more home runs for the rest of the season. Fans began pelting Duke with everything from marbles to roller skate keys.
A lot of people from California were kind of considered outcasts. They were the hot dogs, the prune pickers.
Let kids come in from school and they all bring their lunches. And they'd always bring an apple or an orange or something, and then they'd throw it at you and see if they could hit you, or see who could come the closest anyway. And you always knew when one was getting close because you'd hear the ooh, and then that thing would explode down on the ground right near you.
We loved him and hated him. He seemed to get angry at us. He was like us in a way. He was a big spoiled kid.
They gave him an unmerciful booing every time he struck out. You know, Duke had a flair for striking out. He would strike out and he'd strut away, like it was almost he didn't care that he struck out. So what? I did it.
Snider's troubles with the Brooklyn fans culminated in a fit.
So I came into the clubhouse and threw my glove into my locker. I was really upset, and the writers come in and I blasted the fans.
And he started screaming after the game. Called him, all kinds of curse names to fans. They don't deserve this team. They don't deserve us. They're the worst fans in baseball. And there were 2 writers that were around that time, Bill Roder of the World Telegram and myself. And Duke was doing his screaming, and Pee Wee could hear it because Duke's locker wasn't too far away.
I said, Jack, don't print that, please. I said, he's just a little upset, that's all.
Print it. They don't deserve this team.
Well, the 2 of us wrote the story.
The next day, the headlines in the paper were that big. Snider blasts Brooklyn fans, blah, blah, blah. Well, President Eisenhower had a heart attack a couple weeks earlier, and you had to turn to page 8 to find out how President Eisenhower was doing. So I'm getting ready to go to the ballpark the next day. It's a night game. We're playing Cincinnati. And Bev said she's coming to the game. I says, honey, you better not come to the game. They're liable to tar and feather me tonight.
Stands are full, really. And they got banners hanging out on the center field fence. ever plays. And he said, Snider, go back to L.A. So I started warming up with him.
Even though the fans were booing him, they knew that if Pee Wee was accepting him, he was still one of the team.
And I look, and the left-handed pitcher is warming up.
Duke didn't like left-handers, and lots of times he didn't play against left-handers. So here he's got to play.
And the first time up was about 50% cheers and 50% boos. And I got a base hit. So next time I came up, it was about 75% cheers and about 25% boos, and I got another hit. Third time I come up, it was about 80-20. And I got a third hit. When I got to first base, I got a standing ovation from the fans. So all you got to do to stop the boo is get some base hits, right?
In 1955, Snider hit .321 against left-handed pitching. After a season filled with injuries and controversy, the aging Dodgers won the National League pennant, the earliest in their history. In September, Snider managed just 2 home runs and 12 RBIs. The Yankees clinched the pennant from Cleveland.
I think winning the pennant that early was a hindrance. The everyday pressures weren't there to go out there and excel. It didn't matter if we won or lost. All we were doing was getting our bodies and our minds ready for the World Series and try and beat the Yankees.
And going to the Yankee Stadium to play the Yankees, and all of a sudden we had such a great year, and we're down 2-0 after the first 2 games. Now you're taking the bus back to Brooklyn and say, what's going on again? The Dodgers ever going to win a World Series?
Despite Snider's bat, the Dodgers lost the first 2 World Series games. Then they came back and won the next 3. In Game 5, the largest World Series crowd in Brooklyn history saw Duke clout 2 home runs, making him the first player to hit 4 home runs in 2 separate World Series. After a World Series record 17 home runs by both teams, Game 7 became a pitcher's duel. With 4 series homers of his own, Duke was asked to bunt.
And manager Alston calls on home run slugger Duke Snider to lay one down. Burns' toss pulls Skowron off the bag, and the ball is jarred loose on the attempted tag. All hands safe.
This time, no one would ask for an apology. Duke's sacrifice was the first of 3 sacrifices in the Dodgers' deciding inning, the 6th.
Byrne had won the second game, but strategy.
Duke Snider had to be the most valuable player in that World Series because he was terrific.
We didn't realize it immediately that we'd won a World Championship because we all got into the clubhouse and we sort of all were kind of quiet. We were all looking at each other, and all of a sudden it hit us, and we had a ball. We had a wonderful time.
After the game, Yankee fans lingered in disbelief. Kids ran to the mound and compared their shoe size to the spike marks Johnny Padres had left behind. Snider finished 5 votes behind teammate Roy Campanella for National League MVP. Writer Dave Anderson wrote, "Snider's the best center fielder in baseball these days. That means you, Willie Mays, and especially you, Mickey Mantle."
Dodger fans could always argue that their players were better, but the Yankee fans could always say to them when they were done, yeah, but who won the World Series? And in 1955, for the first time, the Dodger fans could say, yeah, but who won the World Series? And the bittersweet part of it was not terribly long after that the first rumors started to be heard that the Dodgers were going to leave Brooklyn.
In 1957, O'Malley insinuated that if Robert Moses didn't meet his demands, the playing surface could widen. Using the fierce interborough rivalry as a pawn, O'Malley now brought Giant owner Horace Stoneham into the picture. This problem, O'Malley said in a New York Times article, is bigger than the Dodgers alone. If one team goes, the other will go.
Well, I didn't know at the time. We weren't positive the team was leaving. This was a Sunday afternoon. We had 2 more games with Pittsburgh on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then we went to Philadelphia to finish the season in '57. And I had 38 home runs. And that Sunday afternoon, I hit 2 home runs off Robin Roberts to get to my 40th home run and make it 5 consecutive years that I hit 40 or more home runs. My last at bat, I hit a home run at Ebbets Field. If we are going to move, well, I don't want to have any more at bats at Ebbets Field. So I asked manager Walter Alston if he'd not play me on Tuesday or Wednesday, and he didn't.
There was just enough time for one more bout between Duke Snider and the Brooklyn fans.
I made a statement after the team announced their move to Los Angeles that if the team had to go anywhere, I'm glad it was Los Angeles. Well, the writer that took the quote turned it around and said, Duke's glad the team's going to Los Angeles. And it's, again, the media turned things around.
I was born in Los Angeles. I was born and raised baseball-wise in Brooklyn.
At the end of the 50s, Snider had tallied more homers than any player during the decade. In 1963, plagued by bad knees, Duke was sold to the New York Mets, the worst team in Major League Baseball history. 2 years later, Duke would retire with 407 lifetime home runs and a guaranteed plaque in baseball's Hall of Fame. At age 68, Duke would be reunited with an old foe, the New York media.
5 years ago, it happened to Pete Rose. Earlier this year, it was Darryl Strawberry. Today, Duke Snider and Willie McCovey were added to that list of those pleading guilty to tax evasion.
That was a difficult thing, and we've all made mistakes. There's no question about it. And Duke said, well, I made a couple bad decisions. And he said, when we finished there, the media's outside waiting. And you guys, if you want to, we'll exit you another way. And you won't have to. I don't know what McCovey did, but Duke said, I told him, no. The media's been there all the time in my playing days, and I'll go out the front door.
I chose to make the wrong choice about not declaring some income. And I'm sorry about that. I was knowledgeable when I did it. I was told certain things about the incident of not declaring this income. I was aware of the crime that was involved, and I made the wrong choice.
And as a result, I have to pay the price. And we're doing that. And I mentioned that to the media that I hope that my fans will give me a second chance to show them that I'm the type of person they thought I was.
One sensible piece, quite a moving piece, was written by John Lardner in Newsweek. It's about a young person named Edwin Snider who had a dream. He dreamed he would someday get into the major leagues. And he got into the major leagues, and he became a great star and a great player. But he was still Edwin Snider. His dreams had come true, but he still was the same person that he'd been. He said, and this piece is about how hard it is to have your dreams come true.
Well, not too many people are going to remember Edwin Snider. I can't even hardly write Edwin. I thought the golden years were something you're supposed to look forward to.
That's why I'm so gray, because of all the concern and worry that I put in this body. But once you learn that in life, I think you're so much better off. Once you learn that anything that you can't control or have any control over, you don't worry about it. Well, the better off you're going to be.
Duke is a winner. Some people are born that way, and Duke was born a winner, regardless of what he does.
She's been a big help for me. She keeps me going, because without her, I probably wouldn't be here today. We've had some problems, but we've had a wonderful life. Pee-wee and I are the only two living members of the starting 8 in the 55 Brooklyn Dodger lineup. We're the only living members. So how much longer we got, I don't know, but we're going to have a whale of a time between now and when it's over. Satchel Paige once says, don't look back, something might be gaining on you. Well, true. Father Time's gaining on us.
Bye.